This is Hidden Killers with Tony Brueski.
Ever write a college essay that comes back to haunt you? Most of us just got a B- and moved on with life. But Bryan Kohberger's Crime Scene Scenario Final from 2020, a mock investigative report for his criminal justice class, is now sitting in the courtroom. Potentially as one of the prosecution's more chilling pieces of evidence. What happens when your academic work eerily mirrors real-world crimes and you're accused of committing them? Joining us, retired FBI special agent, host of the Break the Case podcast, Jennifer Coffindaffer. With decades of experience analyzing crime suspects, behavioral patterns, she's a perfect person to help us unpack this one. Jen, when you see a suspect who's literally written the step-by-step guide on how not to get caught at a murder scene, does that automatically raise red flags, or is it just another life in the day of a criminology PhD student?
Well, I think it's so important to bring this up to the jury.
Mm-hmm.
The jury is going to want to understand why he actually committed almost the perfect crime, but for that sheath that led them, to him. He did so well, really. He covered up well. He even talks about in his paper, Tony, about how he would use a hairnet. I keep wondering if he used a hairnet in this scenario. We don't know because there's so much evidence that they still don't have, including his clothing and the murder weapon. But he talks about all the details of not leaving any fingerprints and very specific on how to get out of a crime scene without being detected.
And he almost did, except, oops, you left the sheath. Whoopsie. But no, I mean, it does. It goes into great detail. It's not just, this kind of, amateur hour optics on how you think you should get out of it. We're talking about fiber-free overalls and gloves and things like that, going into okay, he's knowing what type of products to specifically buy, not just, hey, let's go and grab whatever seems to be the best deal that day at Dick's. It's no, these specific things are what we need to go for. Again, how damning is that in a case like this, considering the report was done in 2020, quite a ways before these things ever took place, maybe before he even had thought about doing something like this? Or what do you think here? Has this been a lifelong pattern leading up to this moment that he was planning for?
I think it really was. I think this goes, if indeed he committed this crime, this is something that was so deep-seated and so much anger that had built up. And then you combine that with his, wanting to be in the criminal justice system and being turned down really at almost every term other than his situation that he had as a guard at his old school. Other than that, turned down.
Yeah.
And just the buildup of rejection and everything. So I think he definitely was looking through both lenses, the lens of the perpetrator as well as law enforcement. And we know that, Tony, because he talks about it.
Yeah.
He talks about what somebody would be thinking if they were going to commit a murder with a knife. And I thought that was interesting because this was supposed to be about crime scene analysis. But no, you're getting in their head. And he talks about it being, somebody who would be super passionate. And then he also says, though, that it would be an act of impulsivity. Some might argue this wasn't impulsive. This was planned out. I would argue that, yes, overall it was very planned out. But the impulse he got that night to do this murder that night, I think it shows impulse.
Do you think it was the murder that night? Do you think he was planning for that night specifically, or is that the impulse? Was it he's sitting over there in Pullman and going, I feel like going and killing tonight. This is going to be it. I got it. Let's go. Let's do it. Do you think that there could have been other nights where he was going to do it, where we've seen the cell phone data pinging that he's, kind of surveilling the house and such? It could have been any of those nights. It's just the mood finally struck him. He finally got the urge or the courage to do something like this.
That's exactly what I think, Tony. And I think part of the reason that this is supported is because he did not conduct appropriate surveillance before doing this crime. He didn't know, I don't believe, that Kaylee was there and driving that new vehicle of hers. He did not know who was going to be there. I think he was absolutely shocked when he went into Maddie's room and Kaylee was laying next to him. He didn't do the appropriate surveillance to figure out who was there, and that shows impulse.
How did he not think of those parts of this, though, when you have so many other elements just super detailed of what he needs to bring, how he needs to do it, but yet one of the biggest pieces where you could get caught or killed yourself if somebody fights back well enough, those are the things that there were the impulsivity is part of it. But why even make that part of the equation when you're the one executing the plan?
Well, I think a couple of things in the mind of people, I believe, that commit these crimes. They don't think they're going to get caught. They have this whole idea of how it's going to play out. They're going to enter. It's going to be smooth. They're going to walk up the steps. They're going to commit their crime. I think he had much more planned for Maddie as well. I do believe this was a sexual type of crime, I believe. And I think that because of how everything played out, his thought process of how things were going to go sort of imploded. But remember, that's part of all of this, believing you are conquering everything. That's how much power you have over everything, no matter who's there or the circumstances. He thought he could overcome it.
How do you think the defense of Kohberger is going to argue about the report in court and try and gain any sort of traction with it?
Well, you mean with the defense or the prosecution? Sorry, Tony.
The defense of Kohberger. How are they going to, because when it comes up, how are they going to argue and say, okay, yes, he wrote this report. I know what it'll go to. Well, he's a criminology student, but I mean, come on. I mean, just the details of what he's talking about there, so much in line with what reality was, if it's him.
Well, and you pointed it out earlier in your question, and that is, listen, this happened in 2000. This was part of a normal assignment, a final that many people wrote about, and they would have had details like Bryan Kohberger had. This is normal work for that level of student. That's how I would argue it, that it's very general. I would probably try to bring up other examples, and that it's the prosecution is just reaching here, trying to connect the two.
Obviously, it looks really, really creepy, but there are a lot of other pieces of evidence in this case that go beyond just the report. And the report, yeah, it's definitely creepy. But before we move on from the report, are there any other elements of the report from what we've seen of it? Have you seen the whole thing, or have you just seen what we've all seen, just the kind of bits and pieces that have been coming out here?
No, I've read the whole thing.
You have?
It's long. It's 12 pages. Yeah.
Is it out?
I read the whole thing.
I haven't seen it yet. Okay. Well, I got to.
Yeah, I posted it.
Oh, okay.
On my, I posted on my Twitter very early on, like day 1 or 2 of us hearing about it.
What else has stood out to you?
A couple of things. I thought it was interesting how he described strip searching, meaning investigators can use different sorts of search methods, like a whirl method. In other words, how do you go about searching a room? Do you go in a circular pattern? Do you go up and back? Do you go in quadrants and boxes and search to make sure you get everything and don't miss everything? Remember, investigators are looking for every minor detail that's in their crime scene. And he, in the paper, talks about strip searching. And I found that interesting. And, I just found it interesting because I wondered if that affected how he went throughout that house. In other words, in a straight line, knowing that if they did a strip search method, that in other words, he would leave nothing else on 90% of the place. He would know just to go back and forth within the one strip, and that's it. Not leave any of himself anywhere else. So that kind of caught me, that was his preferred method of searching. I wondered if he thought about that when he was thinking about going in.
Yeah, that And then when you combine it with the questions that he was asking in the DeSales, question thing that we saw very early on, where it was very much about, how do you feel? How did this make you feel? I found those to be interesting aspects of his study, the emotional part of it, and trying to get to the psychology behind of it, part of it. Or I do now. It's easier with hindsight being 2020. Was he looking for a guide on how he should feel if he's going to do this sort of thing because he doesn't know how to feel about doing something like this, or is incapable of having any sort of emotion about such acts, and he's looking for guidance from others?
Well, yes. And I say this because we know in his own words, very early on when he was talking about visual snow and everything he was going through, he said, I can't empathize.
Yeah.
He said he knows he treats his father horribly, but he doesn't even care. He just has I'm paraphrasing, but that's his message. He doesn't have the ability to empathize. And so I think he was asking and saying, what are you normal people like? or somebody who's been through it? What should I be feeling? What should I think? And that's really a travesty, right? That he had lost very early on, it would seem, the ability to empathize with anyone.
Yeah, and that would explain the ability to do something like this if you don't have any sort of empathy. There's obviously a lot of other pieces of evidence that we have not fully seen the details of. Like, what are we getting here? What do you think we're going to see pulled back from behind the curtain at some point, whether it's in trial or whether it's through new things being unsealed? There's the dog hair, there's the mattress pieces, there's a lot. There's the hard drives, there's all sorts of stuff. What sort of nuggets are still to come, in your opinion? Just conjecture.
Number one to me is that digital evidence. They caught him in a sense by surprise. Obviously, he had gotten rid of a lot of evidence, but we saw that picture, the famous thumbs up picture in front of the shower. I think we're going to see so much more showing premeditation and showing what he planned, and just Googling different ideas and thought processes. I also think we're going to see a lot post-murder. In other words, just incessantly Googling and reading up on what was going on in the case. I think that's something we're going to see that's going to be interesting. This, again, is just from my experience, not because I know that that's what has happened. I also really, Tony, find the information under Maddie Mogen's fingernails important. And I understand they are not able to conclusively say it's Bryan Kohberger, right? Because that's a huge thing to be able to say. And it's 3 different DNA profiles.
Sure.
I think likely, of course, Maddie Mogen's is one. That's an obvious. And was it Kaylee? And then was it Bryan? We don't know, but there's some probability that's been attached, and the defense is fighting hard to get that probability out. So even though they can't conclusively say it's him, apparently there's a probability. And I think those are the kinds of things we're going to continue to see, not conclusive matches, but possibles.
Want more on this case and others? Then press subscribe now and don't miss a moment of true crime coverage from Tony Brueski and the Hidden Killers podcast.